name's Lou Collins. It's the 20th of February 2012. It's just after 11 o'clock. I'm here today down here in Devon, and I have a co-host, Mr. Brian Gerrish from the UK column.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, Brian. We've got a lot to talk about, so I don't think there's going to be much music on today. I think really we're going to just jump straight in, really, about some events that went on last week. 2 weeks ago we had Robert Greene on the phone, who was waiting to go for sentencing up at Stonehaven Court with regards to a horrible case regarding Hollie Greig. He was arrested in Scotland, thrown into a van, put in solitary confinement for 48 hours. He was then, after that, arrested, he was thrown in prison for handing out leaflets around the Aberdeenshire area where he was standing for Member of Parliament. And Brian's a bit more up on the case than what I am. So he had his sentencing on Friday, and I'm just going to talk to Brian now a little bit more about that. So Friday, the sentencing happened up at Stonehaven. Can you tell us a bit, you know a little more than I do with the UK column. What happened up there at Stonehaven?
Well, essentially, Robert Greene was found guilty on 2 counts. One was breach of the peace, in that he was supposedly handing out leaflets which caused a breach of the peace, and the second thing was breaching bail conditions. But the subtlety, if I can put it that way, in the case is that, in fact, at the time that Robert was supposedly handing out leaflets, he hadn't actually handed out leaflets. He was on his way to hand them out, but he hadn't handed them out. And when he was arrested, there was actually nothing in place from a court to stop him doing what he was doing. But a court order was actually served on him after he had been put into custody or taken into custody by the police. So factually, the whole of the court proceedings, which led through to his sentencing on Friday, were fraudulent and corrupt, and quite clearly there was only one objective by the Scottish establishment, and that was to shut this man up, and the best way they could do that was to find him guilty on a cooked up charge and put him in prison. So he got a year in prison for supposedly causing a breach of the peace by handing out leaflets, which, if you see the leaflets, didn't say anything and didn't name names. They were to do with his campaign to become an MP, to campaign for truth and justice for Hollie Greig, who was the Down syndrome girl who was abused by members of the Scottish establishment. And we're talking some very unpleasant things here, of which rape is the minimum. So it's quite clear when you delve into the case that the Scottish establishment wanted Robert shut up, and they've done that by putting him in prison. Could have been just before, so that was Friday, but there was another case where in Scotland a man who was connected, I believe, with the oil industry was found with 50,000 child pornography images on his computers, and he got off with a community sentence. So a man who's tried to expose child abuse, and very, very nasty abuse, has been locked up in jail to shut him up. Meanwhile, somebody who's clearly been involved with a paedophile ring is simply given community service. Yeah. Now, I'll just add that a lot of people would look at this and say, this is ridiculous, this is madness, it's a mistake, how can they do this? Yeah. But when you delve into the case and you start researching, what you see is a blatant cover-up by the establishment. What are they covering up? They're covering up that the paedophiles are not at street level, dirty old men in raincoats. We're talking about people at high level, judges, police officers, people within social services, and many people are now looking at senior members of the Scottish establishment. Yeah,
there hasn't been. There's been a big buzz about it over the net with Robert, but nothing at all in the mainstream papers. A bit like the same when Dr. David Halpin went to court to try and get an inquest into David Kelly's death. Again, there was nothing in the press about it, and absolutely nothing at all in our mainstream. I believe somebody actually phoned The Sun and asked were they able to, are they going to report on it, and I believe legal teams have been told to be quiet, and I think the only person who's really covered it is the UK column.
Oh, well, this is true, and for listeners who won't be familiar with the story, if I just set the scene a little bit, we were approached about 3 years ago by a lady called Hollie Greig, and her story was that her daughter, who is a Down syndrome girl, had come forward reporting initially abuse by a number of people. Some of them were family, and when as a mother obviously she started to learn more from her daughter, she was horrified that something very, very nasty had taken place with the girl. And of course what she did is what probably any mother would do, is eventually she got the police involved. And this is where we need to be precise, because I'm talking not from hearsay, we're talking from seeing the documents themselves. But we can tell listeners that the police, Grampian Police, when they started a sort of investigation, put in writing that Hollie was a credible witness. Mm-hmm. So here we had a Down syndrome girl reporting that she'd been horribly abused and raped, and she was prepared to, the police were prepared to say she was a credible witness.
Okay.
Probably what all of us would then expect to happen is that the police do a thorough investigation of those who have been named as possible abusers. But we now know for an absolute fact, as a result of the court case against Robert Greene, that the police did not interview a single one of the people that Hollie was identifying as abusers. Not one of them was properly investigated. Mm. And when Anne continued to press, there were two really interesting things that happened. One of which is that at a particular point, Hollie was awarded £13,500 by the Criminal Injuries Board. So we have a situation where the establishment, the police and the legal establishment in Scotland refuse to investigate, but they are prepared, I'm going to use the word bribe, to try and bribe the mother to go away by paying her £13,500 for injuries which they don't admit ever took place. Mm. So that's quite bizarre. But the other thing that happened, which I think is very telling, is that when Anne had made sufficient fuss in order to try and get justice for her daughter, one day police, psychiatrists and members of the local social services turned up on her doorstep, and basically they sectioned her and they locked her up in a psychiatric unit. Mm. Obviously a very frightening experience.
Of course.
And also for Hollie, because she was taken away from her mother. When Anne got out, the first thing she did, which was a very sensible thing to do, was she found her own psychiatrist and got a, if you like, a check on her mental state.
Yeah.
And of course what the psychiatrist said in his report is this lady is perfectly normal and sane. So she had the means to counter what the establishment was trying to do, which is to say that because this woman is reporting what her daughter tells her, that she's got some sort of mental illness. Mm. So the Hollie Greig, I'm going to call it a story, but all the people who are closely involved with it are seeing the real documents. We're seeing police reports, we're seeing interview transcripts, we're seeing the real documents. And they show that from the time this girl reported the horrific abuse and rapes which she endured, the Scottish legal establishment did nothing. Mm. In fact, they conspired with the police to ensure that the case was never fully investigated. Now, why would this be? The minimum is that the abusers that Hollie was naming, and she named in great detail so she could tell what the people did for a living. She could talk about family and personal relationships between the people, and sometimes they were abusing her in groups anyway. But the documentation is all there,
yeah.
And it would appear that the Scottish establishment was terrified of the real truth of this case coming out, And it then rapidly rocketed to a higher level where it was revealed that the head of the Scottish head of legal matters in Scotland, a lady called Eilish Angelini, had actually used a particular law firm in order to try and silence anybody who dared to print any information about this story.
Right.
So in the early days, the UK column, which I hope readers will know is a volunteer paper based in Plymouth, we received a very threatening letter from the law firm Levy McRae, trying to tell us that we couldn't report what we knew was complete truth about this case.
Okay.
And from really that time on, we have seen the Scottish legal establishment absolutely working together to close this case down so that nobody knows the truth about the abuse of Hollie Greig. It becomes worse because we also know for a fact that as Robert's trial progressed, it became known that Eilish Angelini was known to Bowen, who was the sheriff who took the court case.
And was he there? Was he there for sentencing? Was it Bowen?
Yes, it was Bowen who was there for sentencing. And of course, we need to make sure that listeners are aware that when Robert Greene was sentenced, there was no jury present in the court. There was simply one sheriff, who you can say the minimum is he is absolutely part of the legal establishment in Scotland, but it's also factually correct to say that he has involvement with Eilish Angelini via a board of a particular organisation. So it's not just a question that he's there in the establishment. These two are connected in other ways. Now, I think most people would say that is unhealthy, but really people who are close to this and know the devious nature of the establishment in trying to shut Robert up would say that this is certainly grounds for a mistrial.
Right. I believe there's been a big campaign going out by another previous guest of ours, Roger Hayes, and the British Constitution Group. He's organising, I believe, coaches and leaflet runs. That's the word across the net that I'm seeing at the moment. I believe it's sometime in April. Was it the 7th and 8th of April? He's organising coaches to go to Aberdeen.
Well, this is absolutely correct. I mean, we've got something incredible happening here. If we've got to the stage, and I certainly believe we have, because the evidence says to me and many other people this is the case,
right,
that, okay, it's north of the border, we're talking about Scotland, but I can assure listeners this is happening south of the border as well. Our own government, our own legal system is actively protecting paedophiles and child abusers simply because these people are at high level.
Right.
Now, I know this is not a very nice topic for people on a Monday morning, but if we are to have a future, we have to protect our children. And one of the great lies that is being propagated at the moment by the government is almost that paedophiles are dirty old men in raincoats. And so we see from time to time some of them get rounded up in rings and they're put in prison. And apparently we should all be quite happy with that. But as police officers themselves say, and I can assure listeners that we have whistleblowers within the police talking about what is really going on.
What, talking to the UK column?
Talking to the UK column and other activists who are trying to reveal the truth about the child abuse in this country. What those police officers are revealing is that the crime of paedophilia and child abuse exists right across the strata of society. And so we have people at the highest levels, judges, law lords, senior police officers, senior military people involved in it. And I think that quite a few ladies may be shocked to understand that there's roughly a 50-50 split between male and female. So abuse of children is certainly not something which is a totally male a male occupation. The percentage, I believe, is about 52% men, 48% women involved in this. So what I'm going to stick with the police. What the police are saying to us I'll give listeners a couple of examples, but police officers within some of the larger police forces in the southeast of England have said that they have been involved on operations to investigate child abuse, child prostitution, child trafficking. They have learnt and seen the evidence for the fact that people in very high positions of power in this country, MPs, lords, etc., have been involved in this abuse. They've not only investigated the crime and the rings, they've put together the police plans for dismantling the ring. Their report has then been submitted to their senior officer within the police force. They then say, so this is policeman telling us about this. It then goes quiet for 2 months, 3 months, and then all of a sudden they're told that the investigation is to be dropped.
Right.
Now, when one police officer tells you this, you think, well, maybe that was just an occurrence in that particular police area. But we now know that it's actually happening in other police areas as well.
Yeah, talking about police and corruption and everything that's going on, we're going to be speaking to Ian Puddick in a little while, who himself had a few dealings with the police, and there's going to be a Channel 4 documentary, I believe, coming out shortly, and a film with Ian. So I mean, it's right across the board. It's everywhere. The corruption's just everywhere at the moment.
Well, we got that is absolutely true, and I think listeners are going to be stunned at some of the things they will hear about Ian Puddick and what happened with the police in his case. But I would like to stress that yes, we are seeing massive corruption and criminal behaviour within the police force, but and certainly I am not saying that. Therefore, all policemen and women are bad people, because we know this is absolutely not true. What we are seeing, however, is that it certainly appears to be the case that many of the people who are doing the worst activities have been able to achieve positions high up in the police organisation. So the people who are interfacing with the politicians are the people who seem to be controlling the fraud and corruption in the police.
Yeah.
And this, of course, is extremely worrying.
Yeah, of course.
But if I just... a lot of information to get over. Just one more. I've talked about one whistleblower, and no, I can't name the person for that police whistleblower for obvious reasons. But I can say that some time ago in Westminster, there was a meeting which took place at which an individual, I'm being very careful with my words because I have to protect the person concerned, but an individual stood up in front of 2 members of Parliament and about 20 other people in the room, and what they said is that some years ago they were tasked by the police to investigate child abuse, in particular to see whether it was something that was just cropping up in one area or it was happening across the country. And as a result of the investigation by that person and their team, it transpired that child abuse in all its forms, sexual abuse, paedophilia, child prostitution, was happening right the way across the country, and it was not being properly investigated. When a member of the audience in Westminster said, well, what happened to the report about that? The answer we were given was that it was locked up in the safe of the police officer, the senior police officer running the overall inquiry, and it has never seen the light of day since. Now, I'm just going to finish on the note that we are seeing a phenomenal number of children in this country literally disappear. We're talking about 30,000 children. And if you go in the local police station here in Devon and Cornwall, you'll see a poster on the wall which says that on average 5 children a day disappear in the Devon and Cornwall area. In the national press last week or the week before, and I think it was the Daily Mail, was an article saying that in Yorkshire 1,000 children had disappeared within the care system in 1 year alone.
And I know that's something Bill Maloney's trying to bring out. He's running for London Mayor, and he's trying to, expose about what's going on on there as well.
Well, he's an absolutely incredible man. He's produced some phenomenal films. He's dealing with a very heavy subject, and he knows exactly what he's talking about because together with his brothers and sisters, he went through an abusive regime himself. And what he says is that every time he approaches members of parliament or people who are supposedly in the establishment trying to protect or supposedly protecting us, he ends up with a wall. People will not discuss the information and evidence he has. And it's a terrible it is. What's the word? You look at this country and you say, what is actually happening? And I'm sure some people are already beginning to shy away from hearing what we're discussing. But I would gently say to the listeners this morning that we have to understand it, because if we don't look after our children, we haven't got a future. No. Something very, very nasty is at work.
And last week I did bring up, when I was on the phone on air last week, there was a report about the Gardasil vaccine, and what's that saying to the paedophiles, that we're making our young girls of the age of 13 have these injections as well, which are causing so much damage.
Well, it isn't only that the girls are getting the injections. So we have 13-year-old girls being effectively given contraceptives. But what goes with it is the fact that it was done in a deceitful way so that parents weren't told. And here is the state trying to muscle in between parents and their children. And this is exceptionally dangerous. We're also seeing other government programmes at the moment to get into schools, and I can just briefly digress onto the subject of South Wales, where there has been over the last 2-3 years an incredible number of suicides amongst youngsters from the age of 13 up to mid-20s, a few older people admittedly. But when you actually start to look at the suicides, where the overwhelming majority of these youngsters hanged themselves, and you start to look at reasons for it, you discover that a number of agencies have been going into schools. They've been running plays about suicide. They've been giving children, for example, it sounds incredible, but teaching them how to write suicide letters within school classes. And more recently, we're now discovering that national lottery money has been used to help children as young as 14 make cartoon films about suicide. Yeah. Now, anybody with any common sense would say this is not right. But the worrying thing is this is not anybody doing this. This is people and organisations doing it, and they're backed by our own government.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to get Ian Puddick on the phone now. We're going to give a talk to him. The website for Hollie is holliedemandsjustice.co.uk, I think, or is it .org? .org. Cool. holliedemandsjustice.org, and I believe there's a Free Robert Greene campaign going on as well at the moment.
Absolutely. The important thing at the moment is that as many people as possible are made aware not only about Robert Greene, but what the whole case is about, which is the horrific rape and abuse of a Down syndrome girl. And we need to do several things. One is we certainly need to bring Robert Greene's name really into every media outlet we can get. And it is extremely interesting that none of the mainstream media, whether it's the national newspaper or the BBC, will actually cover this story properly. Yeah. But we need to do everything we can to get out about Robert Greene. And at the same time, I believe that we also need to expose the people who are preventing justice from being done. And that includes the sheriff, it includes the legal establishment in Scotland and their equivalent down here in England.
Thanks for that, Brian. Right, we're going to move on. We're going to get Ian Puddick on the phone, who has, something quite relevant with regarding corruption. I'm going to bring him in now. Good morning, Ian.
Oh, good morning, Lou. How are you?
Very well. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. I'm just enjoying a cup of tea at home. I'm never, ever home at this time, so it's quite nice.
Thank you very much for staying at home for me. You've got a documentary coming out shortly, I believe.
Yes. Did you get a chance to look at the trailer?
I saw one when I was down at the UK column briefly with Brian the other morning. I've actually got Brian in the studio with me here.
Oh, right, OK. Good morning, Brian.
Yeah, morning, Ian.
Yeah, we had a look. Just for our listeners down here in Devon who are listening over FM, can you give us a little insight into your experience of what happened to you and your case?
Yeah, OK. I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. I found it's an ongoing saga. This year will be 3 years, but it started in May 2009. Mm-hmm. I found out that my wife had an affair with obviously somebody else. It turned out to be somebody else that was in a very influential and powerful position. Mm-hmm. I called the individual, obviously when I found out, very nicely, to ask for my wife to be moved while we sort this whole mess out. I was told in no uncertain terms where to go. The chap concerned was a board member of the world's largest reinsurance company.
Okay.
So they, in effect, insure the insurance companies. So it's the highest form of investment banking.
Okay.
The chap told me, as I said, to bog off in being very polite. He was the CEO of the company. I then called the chairman of the company, who was wonderful. The company's called Guy Carpenter. Most people would never have heard of them. They're the world's largest reinsurance brokers. I rang up the chairman of the company, a chap named Nick Franklin, who was absolutely wonderful, explained the circumstances. I said, I'm not causing any problems. I would just like my wife to be moved. Obviously, it's a perfectly reasonable request. And this is where it all goes Pete Tong.
Okay.
Obviously, the chairman had to have a word with this chap and ask for, and obviously explained that he'd had a call from me and he wanted my wife to be moved. The chap concerned created a stink saying this is an outrageous lie. He's clearly jealous of my wealth. He made it all up and blah, 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 blah. So the guy went to Sussex Police and reported me for phoning up the chairman of the company and asking for my wife to be moved. I'm not making this up, as you all know, but your listeners will not believe me.
No, because there's already been something.
And I understand why they probably won't believe
It's already been out in many papers, your story, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's
Channel
been covered
4
nationally.
picked it
It's now been covered nationally. It's been debated in Parliament. I'll get to that.
Okay.
But that, all the nonsense that I'm going to come up with next that occurred is a result of just the premise that I've just laid out. And the reason I told you that is because everything else that now happens is because of that situation, and that's why it all becomes so more unbelievable, if that makes sense. Sussex Police said it was a civil matter, not a criminal matter, refused to get involved, and then it gets very, very dark. The reinsurance company, Guy Carpenter, where this chap worked, they owned a company called Kroll. Kroll are the world's largest private security company. They work for governments, big stuff. There's been articles in Private Eye magazine. They do work for MI6. So we're talking about big boys, heavyweights.
Actually Brian and I had a little look into Kroll, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
On Thursday, and found some quite amazing facts about it.
It's very dark. It's very, very scary and dark. And, I'm a plumber. To the average man on the street, it's just a world apart from where most people inhabit. And the kind of things that they get up to is the stuff of science fiction and fiction, crime fiction novels and science and spies and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's crazy. Kroll confirmed to Guy Carpenter's that they had contacts at the City of London Police. This is all in writing, by the way, and everything I've said or I'm saying has been used in court in my defence. So none of this is made up or it's all factual. There's no conjecture here. I'm not saying, well, I think this happened, and I quite think that may have happened. What I'm saying is fact, and we were able to demonstrate it in court tangibly with all the emails and the backup evidence. Kroll's got involved. Kroll's sent emails to Guy Carpenter saying not to worry. They confirmed that they'd spoken to Sussex Police as well, and they put some pressure on a detective sergeant there who said that it was a civil matter, and if they did pursue it, they didn't believe this chap would turn up in court. So Crowell's then turn around and say, well, not to worry, we've got contacts at the City of London Police. And again, in writing, they then go ahead and meet Detective Chief Inspector Chandler and Detective Superintendent Davis, who after a 4-hour meeting confirm in writing that they will devote considerable resources to the matter and the use of the Counter-Terrorism Directorate. What happens next is the managing director of Crowell, a chap named Benedict Hamilton, rings me up, and he even puts this in his police statement. He says that we've got deep, deep pockets, which is what he said to me, and we will F you like you've never been F'd before. A few weeks later, my house, obviously I've got no idea what this is going on. I'm just carrying on with my plumbing. A few weeks after that, 6:30 in the morning, bang, bang, bang on the door, and there's approximately 14 counter-terrorist officers from City of London Police. They raid my home. They do, obviously I didn't know this at the time until later, but obviously I'm arrested and taken away. They then carry out simultaneous raids on my place of work, my plumbing company. They raid that. They also raid my company accountants. They remove all my computer. This is from my home, from my office, and from my company accountants. They remove all my computers, laptops, digital cameras, mobile phone, satellite navigation, you know, anything, and they send everything away to the high-tech crimes forensics laboratory. It's a high-tech crimes lab for a forensic analysis. That's all gone away and checked. We believe that they also went through my VAT. Basically, anything that they could try to find some sort of element of criminal behaviour so that they could do me for.
And they felt they needed to bring in the counter-terrorism unit. Well,
yeah, it went from Sussex saying it's a civil matter, we're not going to get involved, and if we do, we don't believe this chap will turn up in court, because it's all over an affair, or an alleged affair at this point. Now we've got a big raid by the counter-terrorism squad. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't make it up.
No.
You couldn't make it up. You know, anybody that's seen my website, there's a video of me outside Parliament telling this story that I'm telling you now, and at the end of it, I said if my wife had had an affair with the milkman and I phoned the dairy, would I be raided by the... I mean, it's humorous, but, you know, would I be raided by the Counter-Terrorism Directorate? We all know the answer to that. I mean, it's clearly an unlawful breach of my human rights, a breach of trust, an abuse of power, and it's the abuse of power which is for me, the significant issue. Because, you know, they would not do this for anybody else. No. It just wouldn't. No. And it just shows you the fact that it just shows you the corruption, the cultural corruption that goes on. Yeah. So I'm arrested. I'm taken away. I've obviously never been in trouble before. They offer me a lawyer. I decline a lawyer, thinking that I can explain all of this. It's all very explainable. I'm explaining it now. It's not hard. Everything I'm saying is true. I don't need a lawyer to tell me what I can and can't say if you're going to tell the truth. Well, that was my premise. Obviously, that's a big mistake. And you know, everybody says, oh, you know, if you ever get arrested by the police, you have to have a lawyer present. You know, that is so true. Okay. But I didn't know that at the time. You know, I didn't believe I'd done anything wrong. I didn't feel that I'd done anything wrong. We all know the difference between right and wrong. It's inherent. Even if you're doing something that's wrong and you try and justify it inherently inside us, we just know. You know the difference between right and wrong. Of course. So we then, I'm then bailed that evening. I'm bailed that evening and I'm let out. I was in the cells all day. I'm told to go back a month later to Snow Hill Police Station. I turn up at Snow Hill Police Station. I'm then told I'm going to be charged with Section 2 non-violent harassment for making that phone call. And for any policeman listening to this, you'll say, well, there isn't any harassment. Well, technically, depends on how you argue the point. Under the Harassment Act, there has to be two actions. So if I ring you up, Lou, and go and call you lots of names down the phone, that's one. Yep. That doesn't count. But if I do it twice or more, then there's a course of conduct. Okay. So what the way that they created the course of conduct was I'd phoned up this chap in the first place and was very polite and asked him for my wife to be moved. That's the first harassment. And then the second harassment, I rang up the chairman and said, could you please move my wife while we sort this out? He was absolutely wonderful. And my wife is moved. And that should have been the end of it. However, This guy was saying this is going to damage his reputation. If his wife was told this, it would be terrible. This is done out of jealousy and spite. It's completely false. And that's why Sussex police said, even if I did make it up because I'm completely nuts, it would be a civil matter, not a criminal matter. Asking for your wife to be moved, in most people's arms, is probably the most reasonable of situations. I mean, the police, when they arrested me, the terrorist police, were saying they would have put him in hospital and all that kind of stuff. And let's be frank, these things happen, and more importantly, it's no more his fault than it's my wife's. So it has to be some perspective there. But all the tough guys, got to beat people up and stuff. It's just crazy. But so from there, I'm charged with Section 2 non-violent harassment. Then it all starts getting a lot darker. Detective Sergeant John Ellis then says, "Well, we need to question you some more." And then they take me through to to an interview room, and in there, I'm not read my rights. I'm not cautioned. The interview isn't recorded. The officers made no notes. Other than me telling you this now, there is no record of this interview. And in there, John Ellis starts shouting and swearing, using the F word, the C word, calling me a drug dealer, saying, calling me all sorts of things, saying that they've got the forensics laboratory have found photographs of me taking crack, cocaine. I absolutely going to understand. I've never even seen, apart from the telly, I've never seen those kind of drugs.
Yeah.
But I asked for a solicitor at this point, and he said, "You don't need one. It's an informal interview." And I'm saying, "Informal? You just called me an effing so-and-so. That's not informal. I want a solicitor. I'm not going to say anymore. I want a solicitor." Yeah. And he's going, "Well, you don't need one." And he lost his temper so much that he had to walk out of the room to calm down. Right. I kept saying to the other officer present, Colin Dawson, "Colin, I haven't done anything wrong. I've never even seen bloody drugs. Yeah. This is outrageous. This is absolutely outrageous. I want to see these pictures, because if you have pictures, they are completely false. There's not going to be any misunderstandings. I'm not going to then say, oh, there was a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, because it has never, ever happened. So there cannot be a misunderstanding. I demand to see these pictures." So John Ellis comes back into the room, and then he says, "Well, we don't have them with us." So I said, "Well, go and get them. I'll wait." And he said, "Well, no. He said, "There wasn't actually a picture." I said, "Well, you just told me there were pictures." Anyway, I didn't say any more. So then he said, "Well, the forensics," this is a bit embarrassing. I did say this to the judge in court. It's funny now. It wasn't funny at the time. I had just started the very first run of the ladder of becoming a magistrate. Right. And part and parcel of becoming a magistrate is you have to attend court 3 or 4 times to familiarise yourself with the procedures. You have a form that you're filling, and then you start. So he found, he or the forensics laboratory had found a PDF document, which is a government form. You could download it off the government website if you wanted to become a magistrate. So they found that form. Okay. So he said, "We found a form on your computer about magistrates." I said, "Yeah, that's right," and explained what I just explained to you. Yeah. And he said, "I want the names of all the judges and magistrates you're talking to." I said, "I'm not talking to any." He said, "I want their effing names." And I said, "I haven't done anything wrong." He said, and he was shouting, screaming in my face. He was about 3 inches from my face. He was yelling in my face. The other officer was looking at me, shaking his head as if to say, "Don't say anything." But I'm thinking, hang on, I've got nothing to hide. Nothing's going to come back to haunt me, because I'm not telling any lies. And I'm telling the truth. If you tell the truth, one, it's easier to remember, and it cannot go wrong. And I just hadn't done anything wrong. He said, "Do you effing know how serious conspiracy to perverting the course of justice? Do you effing know how serious that is?" I said, "Well, I'm sure it's very serious, but I haven't done anything wrong. I've just downloaded a form because I'm becoming a magistrate." Yeah. He said, "I want the effing names. You're colluding with judges. You're colluding with magistrates. I want all their names." And I came out, and I just thought, you are going to be in so much trouble. You're going to, because I don't know what the rule. I don't know what the rules and procedures are for interviews and police conduct, and
no, of course not.
It just felt incredibly intimidating, and I just knew it was wrong. There was no dispute about what was happening there was wrong.
I'm going to let Brian wade in now with some questions.
Okay, Ian, I've just obviously I'm listening again to what you're talking about, and I just thought it might be helpful for the listeners just to take it through sort of a point. So you start off as a man, your life's normal, your wife then has an affair, you discover it's with somebody in a very senior city organisation.
Yeah.
And as a result of you taking what sound to be quite reasonable steps,
yeah,
we then end up with a massive police raid,
yeah,
which includes counter-terrorism people. How many police officers were involved in that raid against you?
Well, it's really funny because I'll in court, when we got to court, that John Ellis, that officer that was screaming at me in the interview, he wasn't part at that point of the trial. He wasn't going to be involved, and obviously I stood up in court under oath, and I told this story that I've just told you. So the judge was clearly shocked, and she said, "I want him here." She put a hold on the proceedings. She said, "I want him here," and the other officer was in that interview. "I want them here within the hour." So he came into court, and under oath, he turned around, and my barrister questioned him and said, "Can you tell us how many officers raided Mr. Puddick's property?" He said that he couldn't recall because of the passage of time, because we're going back to August 2009. He said that he couldn't recall, but there were probably 3, maybe 4 officers. So my barrister said to him, "Could you perhaps rethink about your answer?" And my barrister started reading out some names in court, and they got it up to he got it up to 7. So the judge then intervened because she was getting confused with the numbers. So she said to the detective sergeant Ellis, "So that 7 officers, is that including the 3 or 4 that you just mentioned, or are they on top?" And he said, "No, they're on top." So we then got it up to 11, and then my barrister read out some more names, and we got it up to approximately 15 officers raiding my property. So then my barrister says, "How many officers raided Mr. Puddick's plumbing company?" So he said, "I don't know because I wasn't there. I was in Mr. Puddick's house." So he said, "Well, either those officers woke up that morning and decided randomly to go and raid a plumbing company, or you instructed them as the officer in charge. What was it?" So he then had to say that he instructed them. And he said, "How many was it?" And we got that up to 7. And then he said, "Also, the officers raided Mr. Puddick's accountants. How many were there?" And that was 4 officers. So just in that morning raid, there were over 20 officers.
Right, so we got over 20 officers. All you had done is made 2 phone calls in connection with your wife. So we suddenly have over 20 police officers focused on you, including counter-terrorism squad.
Yeah.
And I believe you...
It's a really, really bad line. I don't know if you can hear me loud and clear.
Yeah, we can.
I'll speak up. Is that a bit better?
That's a little bit better, yeah. It's really faint at my end.
All right. Well, the next bit is then it emerged during your trial or afterwards, but I think it was during the trial, how much money the police had spent on their action against you. What can you tell listeners how much...
it's called Operation Bohan, and it's estimated to be just over £1 million. However, Chris Plumley, Channel 4 Dispatches correspondent, who's now taken over an investigation of her own into obviously following this, we're talking millions.
Right. So listeners, of course, know that throughout the country the police are complaining that they haven't got the money and the resources to tackle basic crime. Yeah. And yet here we suddenly have over £1 million and 20 officers unleashed. And I'd like to just bring you back to this company Kroll that's suddenly there. So what you're saying, Ian, is that a private security company was somehow able to put in phenomenal leverage on City of London police.
I mean, in the video, the new film that we've been making with Chris Plumley at Channel 4, in an interview with my barrister, which wasn't in the edit that you saw, but it's going to be in the new one, which should be ready in the next week or so. My barrister, Michael Wolkine QC, a very respected barrister in his field, he says on the film when interviewed, he says effectively the whole of the prosecution was run by Kroll, and he said that the internal emails showed that Kroll suggested to City of London police what to do, and his words, not mine, they bowed to the elite, to the elite private security company.
Right, now this of course is, we're really getting into the meat of this thing here, because the moment you start to say that you've got private companies able to control the police, they're able to control 20 police officers as a minimum, and ultimately a budget expenditure of over $1 million, something has happened. We don't seem to have democracy, we don't seem to have accountability anymore. How is it that this company Kroll has got this phenomenal power over our public protection via the police? Now, there's something else which gets interesting, because, and I'll use that wonderful expression, I think I'm right in saying that one of the people connected with Kroll is a gentleman called Bill Bratton.
He's the chairman.
He's the chairman,
And he's the chairman. But correct me if I'm wrong again on this, Ian, isn't this the same man that David Cameron thought should be heading our police force in London? Yeah,
he's over here now. He's staying in I think it's the Dorchester in Park Lane. He's acting now as a security consultant or private consultant to the Home Office on policing.
Right. So David Cameron, who at the moment is making very big of how we need to get to grips with the police and we need to do this and that, David Cameron is using a man from a company that was quite clearly running amok in your case. So if
just Ian's case,
so we've got a company called Kroll, which is obviously Mr. Cameron supports greatly, because he's prepared to use senior officers from Kroll to sort out the police force in this country. So I'm going to come on to accountability. Who are these people accountable to? I mean, if he's a private security man, who is he accountable to? David Cameron?
They're not. That's the whole issue. I mean, ACPO. I was talking to Ken Livingstone, the former mayor of London, and he was saying ACPO, which the Association of Police Constables, it's a private company, a private limited company. He said to me, "Do you know who they're accountable to?" And I said, "Well, obviously the Home Secretary." He said, "No, they're not accountable to anyone." I said, "That can't be. You're joking." He said, "No." He said he was gobsmacked when he found out.
Well, doesn't make sense.
Well, we're just joining up bits. I don't know whether you heard the start of the programme, but
I didn't know.
Well, we were talking about Robert Greene, who's been in prison for a year for trying to get the truth out about the rape and sexual abuse of a little Down syndrome girl.
Yeah.
And quite clearly the Scottish establishment, together with the police, both north of the border and south of the border, have conspired. That's a criminal offence, a conspiracy to cover up and pervert the course of justice. So we're seeing the political establishment prepared to actually work to cover up the abuse of very, very vulnerable children. And now in your case, we're seeing the political establishment absolutely covering up the misuse of police assets to come in against you. And when we dig in the middle of it, we suddenly are talking about private companies. Now, a lot of listeners to this programme, I think, are going to be absolutely stunned to discover that the body that directs police policy is not a public body accountable to the general public. It's actually a private company, and we're now saying that they're not even accountable directly through to members of the government. And we've got other things going on in the background, because Theresa May, I think, has been recently in the press because people are suggesting, well, perhaps paedophiles are good people to foster and look after children. And we know that at the moment we've got another police unit called FTAC, the Fixated Threat Assessment Centre, which means that a group of police officers hidden away in London can turn up on your doorstep with a couple of psychiatrists, and without anybody else's say-so, no appearance in court, they can actually section you. Now, my background, as you know, is military. I was a naval officer till 1993. And during that time, much of it was Cold War time, we were trying to protect this country against a Soviet or a communist regime, which was absolutely using secret police forces and which was sectioning people to shut them up. And what I think I'm looking at the moment with the case with Robert Greene and Hollie Greig and other cases, but also your case, is that we've now got state machinery which is rapidly coming out of control.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's Chris Plumley says in the film that what makes my case so unique is the paper trail, because if we didn't have all the emails and all of the information, it would be me telling you, well, I think this happened and I think that happened, but in this case we actually know because they foolishly or stupidly or arrogantly sent emails to each other, which you just... they're not accountable. The accountability is not there.
Yeah,
and then when you complain, they just close ranks.
Absolutely, but you've also said something else. I think you used the word arrogance.
Yeah.
We're starting to see people who are so arrogant in breaking the law that they don't really care anymore, because nobody is taking these people to task.
No, well, that's the point, and they didn't expect me to react in the way that I had.
Yeah.
By trying to make it so public.
yeah.
I had a very, very orthodox upbringing, very, ridiculously strict orthodox upbringing, and I was brought up to respect authority, and almost wrongly to not even question authority. So, somebody in an authority position says, stand here or move there or do this and do that. You just do it blindly. And having, and clearly what's happened to me is very, very wrong, and I just knew it was wrong, and I just wasn't going to let them get away with it.
Ian, when's this Channel 4 documentary going out?
Realistically, probably not for quite some time. Because there's going to be a lag between between my trial, which was last June, and the documentary coming out. Ironically, this will make you smile. When I actually went to court last June, the actual charge against me, if you cut through all the nonsense, the actual charge was creating a website that discredits a person professionally and personally.
Right.
Even though, and obviously there was a victim, which was the chap that had the affair, even though he wasn't named on the website. So what I said to Chris Plumley was, why don't we make a small teaser video for the larger documentary, and I'll promote it via social media, which is what I did before, and see if the police come and arrest me for doing the same thing again. So that's what we're going to do.
Great. Ian, we're nearly out of time. Your website, if anyone wants to have a look a bit deeper. policeexpenses.co.uk, and they spent over £1 million trying to censor and make sure you didn't see that. The judge said it was all true and I had a right to say it. Great. Well, we're going to thank you so much for sparing your valuable time, and we'll definitely have you on again, and so you can let us know how it's going.
No problem at all. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Ian.
Cheerio.
Thank you, Ian.
My pleasure. Cheerio, Brian. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. another prime example, really.
Well, it's quite incredible, and the key thing is that although some aspects of Ian's case did appear in the national press, the key points were never dealt with. So nobody asked how could a private company influence the police in such a way that they could get assets on the ground. Nobody said, why hasn't there been a huge investigation into Kroll? Nobody has asked which minister was directly accountable for this. So it's significant that we are seeing a silence, really, or propaganda from the press. The BBC, who did do an interview with Ian Puddick, but for those who listened to that interview, they were almost laughing at him as though he was the cuckolded husband.
And then, of course, we've had the Leveson inquiry to shut people, to stop the press reporting on these matters. There's nothing being reported on Robert and Hollie.
Well, the Leveson inquiry, we've written quite a lot on this already, but it's just incredible that we've got the Leveson inquiry with members such as David Bell. When you look at David Bell and his involvement with the Media Standards Trust, this is a group of people who appear out of nowhere campaigning for massive changes to press control, and in particular the Media Standards Trust has consistently attacked the Police Complaints Commission, and you draw the conclusion that the aim is to shut down free press. And I can't remember the gentleman's name, I think it was Lord Hunt, stood in front of the Leveson inquiry, and he said that he knew of people in government that wanted government control of the press. So this morning, in 1 hour, we are describing how private security companies can control police on the ground. They can interfere in our natural justice system. We know that there are police units, the Fixated Threat Assessment Centre, that can actually section people indefinitely. And now we're looking at a government which is taking control of the press. I understand that many of the Sun journalists, and indeed journalists and reporters with other mainstream papers and the media, are getting very jittery because, of course, anti-terrorist police were used to kick in the doors of those Sun journalists. Now, what is going on? Because if we've got the police being used to arrest journalists in UK, we're very, very close to a Soviet system. This is very dangerous.
It is dangerous. Well, we've got through so much. There was more I wanted to talk about, and an hour just wasn't really long enough. A great thanks, big thanks to Brian for coming in and co-hosting with me. James, my co-host who's in usually with me, he's been in here filming, and Mike from the UK column is also in the studio with us. So I'd like to thank you all for coming in and joining me with these tough issues that I've tackled today. Next week I've got Sarah and Michael Feely coming in on a bit of a lighter note. But in the meantime, my name's Lou Collins. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Extinction Day, and it's alright now, yes it's alright now, and it's alright now, well the bell just tolled, and it's Saturday, yes the bell just tolled, and it's Saturday. Look around and see so many people sleeping like babies, stuck inside a media play, believing in everything they can see and hear all on the TV. It's the brain fall like a judgment day, and it's alright now, yes it's alright now, and it's alright now, well the bell just tolled, and it's Saturday, yes the bell just tolled, and it's Saturday.